Feroz, great to have you with us.
Thank you for having me.
And so, literally going from the sky, we're going to ground us every street corner. Even the airport here, when I landed, you have an outpost here.
I do, yes.
I was astonished to see a fitting room and people changing at the Cape Town airport. And so, obviously, you're an institution in this country, but more broadly, when you think as a long-standing and venerable brand, one that's managed to survive the vagaries of retail and the challenge from the internet online threats, how do you think about managing the global supply chain, which really lies at the heart of sustainability, I would posit, for a company like you?
Absolutely, yeah.
And again, it must be noted, the supply chains have undergone dramatic change in the last decade, even before COVID and the tariff wars and the disruptions. We were seeing a realignment of global supply chains. So I'm curious, how do you manage that from your perch?
Yeah, I think there's two things to understand in that space. So absolutely correct. Supply chain is fundamental. So the first thing to note is that the supply chains are really complex and diverse. So we have a foods business, a fashion business, a homeware business, and a beauty business. And so managing these supply chains is a complex thing. The second thing is that we are primarily an own brand or private label business. So we have an obligation when we source, we're not just buying from unknown third parties or going to the market for the cheapest product. We are developing product to our specifications, which is made for us by partners, whether locally or internationally. And so we have an obligation to manage how we source that. So we take a very embedded view in the sense that the sustainability of the products that we're sourcing is part of the inherent nature of those products. So how we design the products, whatever the commodity or end product is, there will be sustainability components or considerations built into that from design phase onwards.
Let me ask you this. I want to dig a little bit into that because there are leading global companies have shown that this is something important, but it can be very complicated.
Yeah.
Bringing supplier networks along can be challenging. Maybe your tier one supplier you can deal with, they have a brand, they're known, but their supplier and the supplier of your supplier, it becomes incredibly complex, and oftentimes there are very thin margins along these value chains, or there might be single source suppliers who you may not be able to have as much leverage to get them to change their operations and so on. So in practical terms, how have you persuaded your network of suppliers that they should take sustainability as seriously as you do? Have you provided any kind of financing or technical assistance for those that might be small and medium enterprises? Give us a sense of the granularity of what you've actually done.
Yeah. So, and what you're talking about goes to the heart of how this happens, right? It's reliant fundamentally on the relationship with the suppliers. So we tend firstly to have a very deep and long-standing type of relationship with suppliers. We regard them as partners in our business. And how we do this is to get them to understand what our end game is, and we support them in that journey. Now, it helps where suppliers are closer to home, and you're right about tier one suppliers. Understanding if tier one suppliers are suppliers who supply us directly. Tier two suppliers are those who supply our suppliers and so on. We focus firstly on tier one suppliers. We have standards, so there's codes of business practice, we have audits in place, etc., to hold them accountable to what we expect. But we do support them in that journey specifically. So when I spoke about product development, we design, formulate products according to standards that we want, and we work with our suppliers in order to meet that. So if we're sourcing beef products, we have approach around non-use of routine antibiotics, for example, for a human health perspective. So we work with the farmers on how do we ensure that the herds that we source from don't have routine use of antibiotics. If we're sourcing cotton for our fashion business, we go out and ensure that the suppliers are able to comply with the global better cotton standard to which we are signatories.
And you've got a Farming for the Future initiative, I understand.
We've got a Farming for the Future initiative, which is now 12 to 13 years old, which is a science and data-driven approach to farming in harmony with nature, looking at soil health, water usage, crop rotation, etc. We currently have about 200 primary suppliers on that program. In South Africa, we've just got our first international supplier, a coffee farmer in Brazil, on that program. in the last year, so it's a continuous evolution and improvement program. The last year, every farm on the program had 145 data points measured by independent agronomists to ensure that they can farm efficiently, using less water, managing their water discharge, using less harmful inputs, protecting biodiversity in the soil, etc., so that they farm more efficiently, are more resilient to drought. They have better data at their hands. We use drone. So we heard in the previous talk, similar what we use drone technology for picking up disease crops, etc., etc., and using all of these data points to enhance the efficiency of the farmer, but farming more in harmony with nature.
So for us, all this sounds great, world class. As I say, I've had lots of people on the Economist stage, including Walmart, for example, which has a good track record actually on these issues. There's two things I want to press you on that I want to understand how you're doing. One, how are you paying for this? Are you counting on a green premium because you do have a premium post in this marketplace? Or some other way of thinking about payback? And the second is, how can we keep you honest? Because there's a lot of greenwashing in this space, and there's also a lot of consumer skepticism about green claims. So however legitimately you're doing it, and I haven't kicked your tires yet, so I'll come and visit and do that, people need to be seeing that you're doing it in a transparent way, in a way that's followable by third parties or by consumers themselves. So let's get to those things before time runs out. And again, I want to ask my audience for any questions.
I mean, two really good questions there. So you're right. I mean, there is cost associated with it. I do think, though, we have to take the approach we take is understanding what is the cost of not doing it also. Because in these supply chains and these complex and diverse supply chains we talk about, there are risks and impacts and risks on the business. So what happens if we don't do these things? What happens? How resilient is our supply chain? We are seeing, we source a lot of fresh produce in the Western Cape. We're seeing farmers who are already land banking in the northern parts of the country for future potential having to move crops there because of changes that they're seeing on the ground here in terms of temperature, water etc., those kind of things.
Right.
So
it's a bit of a hedge or an insurance.
This absolutely
right. Risk mitigation.
We try. I mean, certainly there is a premium on some of our products.
Right.
There's a lot of return in terms of better data, better relationship with suppliers, supply efficiencies, yields are better, etc. So it's not necessarily always a net cost. In terms of how do you hold us accountable? Absolutely. One of our commitments is around supplier transparency. We firstly want to understand and supply chain visibility around how far down a supply chain we can see. Now, fresh produce, there's just one tier. We walk on the farms ourselves. So we walk out in series and you can see who grows the apples and the pears and the stone fruits, etc. But if we buy this jacket, for example, or the shirt, there's probably 6 tiers if you look at the farm, the mill, the dye house, etc., etc. And so we're firstly getting visibility through the supply chain. Having said that, we have published our tier 1 supplier list for our South African fashion business and for our country road business in Australia. We're the first business in South Africa to publish any of its supply lists. We've already were looking towards publishing our tier 2 supplier list, and that includes names of the supplier, location, etc., and it's available publicly on our website. So part of the accountability mechanism is transparency. We're working towards traceability as well. We want to be able to get down to product level traceability and over time be able to label products from a traceability perspective. And in that space, we're doing a lot of work with a variety of partners. One of them, interestingly enough, uses DNA-derived technology to be able to trace a product to a particular field of a farmer, not just a farm or region. You can tell if it came from field A or field B, even if they're next to each other, based on the unique characteristics of this.
Cotton, or what are we talking about?
Cotton. You can do any crop that's grown, and even for aquaculture, based on the conditions of the water, you can tell which pond a fish was grown in, based on DNA type of technology. So we use all of these things to be able to get insights into our supply chain and then start making it more visible.
What's the biggest challenge you face in doing this? Obviously, you're leaning into this. There can be first mover disadvantages to doing the right thing. If you get too far ahead of your marketplace competitors, regulation, or even customers' willingness to pay or understand what you're doing. Have you made some mistakes along the way?
I mean, look here, we continuously learn on this journey, especially if you want to be, as you say, a first mover. I'm sure we made lots of mistakes.
Name,
I don't
name
think
one.
any.
Just to let the audience know, I'm not giving you an easy ride here.
No, I mean, look, when you move into new spaces, you don't know which standard is the right standard, or you might choose to work with a partner who probably is not as committed as you are, and you find out later on down the line you're committed to a product range, etc., and you can't deliver on a commitment that you want to deliver against. But that doesn't stop us from pursuing this direction. This is the right way to go. If we understand that we don't operate and exist in isolation, in an island, there are impacts on us as an organization from the broader environment, society, etc., and the impacts to what we have on it. And how do we manage those kind of things? How do we ensure that we are not exacerbating the problem, that we can be part of the solution? We continue to source in ways that are responsible, that respect nature, that respect societies, that we talk about environmental issues. We also focus on social issues, labor standards, supply chain, fair wage. There's issues of modern slavery and forced labor in global supply chains. All of these kind of things that we need to be aware of and ensure we don't turn a blind eye to, and set up systems and processes to manage and mitigate any risk that come from them.
The last point before we run out of time. In some parts of the world, we have seen something of a backlash in the US against ESG. In Europe, we saw with the European elections, there was a backlash against climate action, mostly because people saw it as raising prices for petrol and so on. But nevertheless, there is a sentiment that is not always on board with everything you're doing or being willing to pay for it. How are you preparing yourself for that in case it should happen in your markets, or is it already happening?
I don't think it's happening. I think it's the contrary. I think we're seeing more of an expectation from customers, from regulators. The investor community, for example, are really active in this space and have been for the last few years. So I have not seen any of that, and I hope it doesn't happen, because I think that it does stem from a bit of a politicization of ESG or the term ESG. But I think it's a misunderstanding of what we're trying to do. And to my previous point is, we do not exist in isolation. I think the days of Friedman are gone. We can't just go there and say we want to make the highest return for a shareholder, irrespective of what the consequences are. We just heard the previous speakers talking about impacts, you talking about climate change, etc. It's about saying, if we want to be a successful business going forward, we need to recognize this and work in a way that ensures that we mitigate risk for ourselves, but also ensures that we are not contributing to that problem and making the problem worse for ourselves and for society generally.
Great. Well, thank you. Please join me in thanking Feroz for giving us an insight into what a leading company is doing in this area.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.